March 15th, 1921, Berlin. A man is shot in the head in broad daylight. The shooter is a student in mechanical engineering. He's caught by the police minutes later after being beaten up by a mob of witnesses. The crime captivates both the German and the international press at the time. The victim, Talat Pasha, is the former head of state of Turkey, and his attacker, Soghomon Tehlirian, is a young Armenian. A few weeks later, the Tehlirian trial begins in an agitated court. The Berlin courthouse is packed with journalists, curious citizens, and lawyers who abandon their practice to attend the proceedings. The public expects it will be an opportunity for the Armenian cause to be finally heard. Despite the press's best efforts to relay information about the massacres of 1915, the international community has had little or no reaction. The proceedings begin with the defendant's testimony. Tehlirian is addressing the presiding judge. He starts telling how his family and himself were deported 6 years earlier on the orders of the former Turkish Prime Minister, Talat Pasha. How he watched his mother and sisters being massacred, and how he was left for dead and woke up under the corpses of his family members. This is how he ends his deposition. I do not consider myself guilty because my conscience is clear. The presiding judge asks, "Why is your conscience clear?" To which Tehlirian replies, "I have killed a man, but I am not a murderer."
La liquidation de Talat, c'était quand même quelque chose de merveilleux. Enfin, c'est comme si quelqu'un, un juif quelconque, jeune, avait eu la chance de mettre une balle dans la tête d'Adolf Hitler, quoi. Ouais. C'est exactement pareil. Pour les Arméniens, Talat, c'est exactement ça.
Soghomon Tehlirian's first statement throws a new light on the affair. The assassin paints himself as a victim and forces the court to raise the question of Talat Pasha's role in the Armenian massacre. The audience is gripped by the troubled story of the Armenian community at the time of the Ottoman Empire. At the start of the 20th century, this empire is so vast it stretches over 3 continents.
On a oublié que l'Empire ottoman, au début du XXe siècle, n'est pas à 100% musulman. Il y a à peu près encore 30 à 40% de non-musulmans, des chrétiens orthodoxes comme les Grecs, des Arméniens apostoliques, des catholiques, des protestants, des juifs. Donc l'Empire ottoman n'est pas homogène, c'est un empire.
Les non-musulmans sont dans un statut de sujet de deuxième zone. Tout ce qui est politique et militaire est réservé aux groupes dominants musulmans, et les groupes dominés, essentiellement chrétiens, sont reversés dans les missions de commerce et de production.
At the turn of the century, whilst waves of modernity strike the Ottoman Empire, this second-class citizen status is about to change significantly.
On a vu des artisans grecs ou arméniens se transformer en entrepreneurs, donc acquérir une certaine prospérité. Ces mêmes entrepreneurs envoyaient leurs enfants se former dans des universités en Europe. Et globalement, un déséquilibre socio-économique a commencé à s'accentuer entre le groupe dominant et le groupe dominé.
The Armenian people call for equality of rights. They want to participate in the political and administrative life of the empire. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation, also called the Dachnak Party, which is becoming increasingly popular, is among the parties championing these demands.
C'est donc un parti qui n'a pas pour but l'indépendance. Ça reste une sorte de demande d'identité, d'autonomie, davantage de pouvoir, d'organisation d'une communauté qui a été longtemps écrasée, etc.
But Sultan Ahmed Hamid II is opposed to any kind of progressive reform and takes the path of mass repression. In the face of tyranny, the Armenians have found a precious ally, the Young Turks movement, which is equally determined to shake the empire from its old ways. From a very young age, Talat Pasha was an activist in the Young Turks movement, whose ideology is inspired by the French Revolution. He quickly moves up the ranks.
It was a revolutionary party with a goal to create a constitutional monarchy in the empire. So basically a party aimed to live with other ethnic groups in the empire, and they even signed an agreement with Armenian Revolutionary Party in 1907. This was a congress in Paris to fight together against this authoritarian Abdülhamid regime.
July 1908, the Young Turks lead the revolution against the Sultan's absolute rule. They force the Sultan to restore the constitution and impose the election of the Ottoman parliament.
The Armenians and Young Turks, they were marching on the street. They were even singing the French Marseillaise, the revolutionary song of French nationalists.
On a beaucoup de cartes postales, de photographies où on voit les foules en délire, avec des écriteaux dans toutes les langues, en arménien, en ottoman, en grec, sur liberté, fraternité, justice.
Ça constitue un immense espoir pour l'ensemble de la population qui se dit « Enfin, nous sommes libérés du joug tyrannique et archaïque du sultan Abdülhamid ». En Europe, par exemple, des gens comme Jaurès applaudissent à l'arrivée d'un régime qu'ils imaginent progressiste. Et effectivement, il en a toutes les caractéristiques.
In the first elections, the Young Turks win a large majority of the seats in the parliament. Talat Pasha is elected representative of Erdin before his nomination as Minister of the Interior and Secretary General of the Committee of Union and Progress. 13 years later, the German public watches the trial of his assassin. The presiding judge requests the testimony of Mrs. Dittmann. She is a neighbor of the victims. She lives right across from Talat Pasha's home and confirms she's also Tehlirian's landlady. The presiding judge asks if she noticed anything unusual on the day of the murder. Mrs. Dittmann states that the young man had cried that morning, but that she didn't notice anything else. She's never had to complain about this well-behaved young tenant who played the mandolin. She'd often hear him humming nostalgic songs of his country when he was alone. Once she had asked him about his country and his family. I could feel so much pain in the way he was talking about them that I didn't want to ask any more questions, she concluded. This pain, which Soghomon Tehlirian carries, is not only his, but also his people's, whose hopes in the outcome of the 1908 revolution and the Young Turks' reforms were crushed.
They made a lot of promises to Armenians, to Greeks, to all other nationalities, that they will have their own languages, their own autonomy, their own democratic right.
These promises will remain unfulfilled. Indeed, the Young Turks' aspiration to modernize the country is fueled by a poisonous ideology popular in Western Europe at the time, nationalism. Unfortunately, it will have particularly devastating effects in the case of the Ottoman Empire.
On passe d'un modèle impérial multiethnique à un modèle d'État-nation. Et dans l'esprit des jeunes Turcs, l'État-nation, c'est un État-nation turc. Donc, il y a une logique d'exclusion de tous ceux qui ne veulent pas ou qui ne peuvent pas entrer dans cette logique de construction d'un État-nation turc sur le modèle français.
In April 1909, just 10 months after the new regime was put in place, massacres begin in Cilicia, in the town of Adana in particular. 30,000 Armenians are killed. Skepticism about the young Turks' democratic intentions for the country gains ground.
Le terroir arménien, ces provinces orientales, se vident de leur population arménienne. Les gens fuient l'insécurité, voire la famine. On a déjà 120 000 Arméniens aux États-Unis à la veille de la Première Guerre mondiale, une trentaine de mille en Égypte, autant en Bulgarie ou en Roumanie.
At the trial of Talat Pasha's murderer in Berlin, the question of premeditation is crucial. Under German law, if Tehlirian's premeditation is proven, he may face a death sentence. The defendant pleads the absence of premeditation. According to his testimony, he didn't even know Talat lived in Berlin when he came to Germany to finish his studies. He saw him once in the street by accident. After this day, the corpse of his mother haunted him constantly. Her ghost came to him in his sleep. "You have seen Talat and you remain indifferent. You are no longer my son." These visions and the epileptic seizures he keeps having since the massacre have driven him to murder Talat Pasha. Schultz, advisor to the court, comes to the stand to refute Tehlirian's statement. He testifies that when he was arrested, the young Armenian stated he had come to Germany to kill Talat Pasha. He even chose an apartment across from his home to spy on him. Tehlirian is heard again and maintains he has no recollection of the interview Schultz refers to. The interpreter, Kaluzdian, confirms the defendant's declaration. He translated the young Armenian's first confession. Tehlirian had received the blow to the head and was still in shock. The interpreter thought the content of the interview was inexact and reminds the court he refused to sign the transcript. The court eventually rules that Tehlirian's confession is inadmissible. Once premeditation is ruled out, a whole line of accusation goes down the drain. The Balkan Wars in 1912 is a dramatic turn of events for the Ottoman Empire. The Christian populations of Europe initiate the conflict in order to restore the old ethnic borders that had been disrupted by the imperial redistricting. The coalition of Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro attacks the empire on several fronts and rapidly prevailed.
Within 1 week, 1912 October, Ottomans lost almost 75% of their landholding in Europe. And this was a big shock for them. And not only that, all Union and Progress Party members, all government party members, all leaders of the party, they were from Balkans. And within 1 week, they lost their homeland. And it was a big shock for them. And everybody knew after the loss of Balkan, it was the turn of Anatolia. Then Union and Progress Party made a very clear decision. It is not possible to live with Christian in this country.
On the 23rd of January 1913, a triumvirate composed of members of the Young Turks, Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha, and Cemil Pasha, take full powers by force. With the help of radical officers, they remove the members of the cabinet and kill the Minister of War. A terrorized parliament grants them full powers.
Cette radicalisation du régime, elle va donner lieu à une épuration de l'opposition, à la suppression des partis d'opposition et à l'instauration d'un système parti unique, donc totalitaire. Ils vont éradiquer littéralement tous les cadres militaires d'anciens régimes au sein de l'armée et mettre en place des officiers issus des rangs jeunes turcs. Tous les préfets et gouverneurs de province vont être nommés selon leur profil idéologique et en particulier leur adhésion au parti jeune turc. En février-mars 1914, plusieurs réunions vont décider de la déportation des populations arméniennes, mais il s'agit de déportation. Tous les biens de ces populations déplacées sont confisqués.
One factor in particular will facilitate the Young Turks' plan. The Ottoman Empire enters World War I as an ally of Germany. Thanks to this new alliance, the Turks will both benefit from military technology and colossal financial support for the war effort from their new allies. Indeed, the reorganization of the Turkish army had been overseen by Germany. But during the war, the Kaiser's chief of staff sends a large military mission led by General Liman von Sanders to Istanbul. He becomes the Inspector General for the Ottoman army. And in that capacity, he testifies at the Tehlirian trial in Berlin, 1921. No German would ever dare question his testimony. In my opinion, says the general, anything that concerns the Armenian massacre can be split into two separate moments. First, there is an order from the Young Turks government to deport the Armenian people. The government is obviously responsible for this order, but cannot be blamed for any somber consequences this order may have had.
Im Prozess ist seine Aufgabe die, mehr oder weniger die osmanische Regierung zu exkulpieren. Und das tut er in seiner Aussage. Er leugnet nicht, dass es Verbrechen gegeben hat, dass es die Deportationen gab und dass es im Kontext der Deportationen auch Massaker gab. Das bestreitet er nicht, aber er schiebt es auf subalterne Entscheidungsträger und er exkulpiert die Führung.
General von Sanders insists, in the German army's defense, I must say that no German officer ever took part in any action against the Armenian people. Quite the contrary. We stepped in every time it was possible. For my part, I arrived in Smyrna once and the prefect had just taken 600 Armenians out of their beds to be deported in cattle wagons. I intervened and sent this message to the prefect. If one more Armenian gets hurt, I will have your officers shot.
Dieses Beispiel ist oft zitiert worden in der zeitgenössischen Publizistik der 1920er Jahre bis heute als ein Beispiel, dass wenn einzelne deutsche Militärbefehlshaber sich widersetzt hätten, dass sie dann auch erfolgreich gewesen wären.
This tragedy will unfold in the heart of the traditional Armenian land. In the winter of 1914, Turkey decides to open an eastern front against Russia in the region. The Armenian population is spread across both sides of the border. The men are divided into two groups, those who fight in the Ottoman army and those who fight in the Russian army. In January 1915, claiming that soldiers are turning against their camp, young Turks executives decide to disarm all 120,000 Armenian men in the Ottoman army and assigns them to labor battalions. In reality, a different plan altogether befalls. They are being executed in small groups, sometimes after having dug the very trenches which would become their mass graves.
Alors, la question des volontaires arméniens du côté russe est un des arguments négationnistes pour justifier le génocide et les accuser de trahison, justifier aussi la déportation pour éviter un coup de poignard dans le dos, la 5e colonne, etc.
La radicalisation, elle est officialisée, elle se cristallise au mois de mars 1915, donc plusieurs mois après l'entrée en guerre. Elle se cristallise au cours de plusieurs réunions du comité central Jeunes Turcs qui ont lieu à Istanbul, à leur quartier général. Au cours de ces réunions, il est manifeste qu'on est passé de la volonté de déportation à une volonté d'extermination systématique des Arméniens.
April 24th, 1915, raids begin in the capital, Constantinople. That day, over 650 Armenian intellectuals and public figures are arrested and deported. In the next few days, there will be another 2,000. Everywhere across the empire, the same scenario plays out. It's a new and terribly effective policy, deporting all the Armenian civilian population to the Syrian deserts for supposed security reasons. Their true destination is death.
Talat, the interior minister, he wrote a memorandum, 1915, May 26, and he was summarizing the entire Armenian question. And he was using this formulation. Armenian reform problem, he describes this, became a really serious concern of our state, and we were considering a final solution for that problem. So they didn't know what, but they were considering a final solution, a definitive solution for this Armenian reform issue.
In a dramatic turn of events, one of Tehlirian's lawyers produces a document proving that Talat Pasha was responsible for the massacres. It's a coded telegram from the Minister of the Interior at the time, Talat Pasha himself, addressed to the governor of Aleppo. The wording couldn't be more explicit. Their existence must come to an end, however tragic the means may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex or to conscientious scruples.
They were planning to reduce the Armenian numbers approximately around 200,000. And they removed around 1.3 million Armenians. And do you know how many Armenians survived at the end? Approximately 150 to 200,000 in Syria and Iraq. So they were, for me, from my standpoint, perfect social engineers, and they did everything with mathematical accuracy. They were not some idiot fanatics, Islamic whatever, and organized everything because of their belief or fanatism. They were statesmen, and they considered the only way to save their state was to reduce the Christian population to 10% of Muslims, and they implement this plan.
L'élément qui résume peut-être le mieux l'idéologie jeune turque, c'est ce que les sociologues appellent le darwinisme social, c'est-à-dire une sorte de lutte pour la survie telle qu'elle existe chez les animaux appliquée à l'homme. Chez les jeunes Turcs, le darwinisme social est une quasi-obsession quotidienne.
C'est eux ou nous. Donc c'est le darwinisme social, c'est un petit peu cette vision des autres peuples qui empêche à la fois la création de cette future nation turque homogène, avec une économie nationale, donc essayant de boycotter aussi ou de récupérer les biens des populations encombrantes. L'idée qu'il menace la formation et la préservation d'un sanctuaire turc.
When the ex-prime minister's telegram is presented at the trial, the prosecutor is outraged. He demands its authenticity be verified, and the telegram included as evidence in the case file. He argues the jury is not here to debate Talat Pasha's guilt, but rather his murderers. Sitting quietly in the audience since the beginning of the trial, a young woman listens carefully to the debate. She is waiting for her turn. When the presiding judge calls Mrs. Christine Terzabakian, her appearance all but reflects the testimony she's about to give. She survived the massacres. The jury is overwhelmed by what she came to say.
La guerre constitue la condition nécessaire, absolue, dont les jeunes Turcs avaient besoin pour mettre en œuvre cette politique systématique. La guerre, ça enlève toutes les inhibitions. Ça libère la violence. Quand de surcroît, l'État vous donne un blanc-seing pour accomplir, il me semble qu'à un moment, il y a une sorte d'ivresse de la pratique de la violence. On en devient ivre. C'est comme une addiction.
In the witness box, Mrs. Terzabakian declares,
I was in Erzurum when, in July 1915, the Armenian population of the city was rounded up and ordered to leave the city. We were told to abandon our homes because they would be in the direct line of military operations. We later learned this was a lie, and that only Armenians were told to leave. There were 500 families in the convoy. My immediate family consisted of 21 people. We had rented 3 ox carts and took everything we could with us: money and food. As soon as we had left the city walls, the gendarme came and searched all our belongings for arms. They confiscated knives and umbrellas and other things. Once Erzinga was in sight, they forbade us to enter the city. We were forbidden to drink water. The oxen we had with us were taken away and driven up into the mountains. Then we started walking again. That's when we started noticing the corpses piling up, on which we sometimes had to step to keep going forward. My legs were covered with the blood of the corpses I stepped on. They separated about 500 of the young boys and tied them all together. Then they pushed them into the river. The current was so strong that they were swept along and drowned. I saw it with my own eyes. We begged and we cried, but we didn't know what to do. They wouldn't even allow us to cry, and we were pushed forward with bayonets. We arrived in Malatya carrying what we could on our backs. We were taken up to the mountains where they separated the men from the women, but not too far away from one another, so we were able to see what was happening to the other group. Men were killed with axes. When night came, the gendarmes came to pick the prettiest women and the prettiest young girls. Those who resisted were pierced with bayonets, and their legs were torn apart. Pregnant women were not spared. Turks would open their wombs, take the fetus out, and throw it onto the ground. I swear, this is the truth.
On les appelle des bataillons de bouchers. C'est l'expression consacrée à l'époque. J'ai localisé environ 32 sites abattoirs où ces escadrons étaient à demeure. On croit souvent qu'ils se déplaçaient. Non, c'est les déportés qui se déplaçaient et qu'on déplaçait vers eux.
These special organization units, they were taken from army, they were put under party command, and they became kind of special organization of party, like the SS units maybe. Special army units were established mainly from three sources. Number one, Kurdish tribes. And secondly, they put a lot of Muslim immigrants from Caucasus and Balkan. They were full of hatred against Christians, and they lost their homes, they lost their relatives, their relatives were killed. So they were really full of hatred, and they were looking for revenge. And the third important source, they were the prisoners. The Ottoman Union and Progress Party, they emptied the prisons, and the killers, the prisoners, long-term convicted really criminals, they became members of these paramilitary units, and these units were established in the extermination process.
During Mrs. Terzabakian's disturbing testimony, the audience is horrified. One by one, Turks who had come to see the trial leave the court. While the public loudly expresses its outrage, the jury is visibly very shaken. Right after the testimony, one of Tehlirian's lawyers reminds the court that thousands of similar confirmed accounts of the massacres exist. The stormy debates seem to leave Soghomans Tehlirian's calm unaffected. They are followed by the contradicting deposition of medical experts. They've been called up to testify concerning Mr. Tehlirian's accountability at the time of the murder. Dr. Robert Stromer comes to the stand and declares he has thoroughly examined the young Tehlirian, both psychologically and physically. He concludes that the young Armenian student is indeed epileptic. He wasn't born epileptic, but began suffering from this condition after witnessing the slaughter of his family. In his opinion, Soghoman Tehlirian was incapacitated at the time of the crime he committed. In total, 5 medical experts are called to the witness box. 3 of them claim Tehlirian is accountable for his action. The prosecutor takes the stand and uses the expert's statement to insist on Tehlirian's responsibility and points to the probable premeditation. He requests capital punishment. Tehlirian's lawyers give a series of brilliant pleas. Presiding judge, judges, jury, audience, even bailiffs and police officers listen almost religiously for 4 hours. The first lawyer focuses on the Armenian massacres, demonstrates Talat Pasha's guilt, and recalls the 1919 verdict of Constantinople's court-martial, the death penalty. The second insists on the image of Germany, Turkey's accomplice in the massacres in the eyes of the world. He stresses that a decision of justice would go a long way in distancing the new German government from the old Prussian ally of the Turks. The German people cannot be thought to condone these atrocities. The jury leaves for deliberations. But already, the particular framework of this singular trial inspires a young Polish lawyer whose name will leave its mark in history. Raphael Lemkin.
After he read about the trials, he asked one of his professors. He said that, I don't understand why they didn't arrest one man, Talat Pasha, who killed 1 million people. He can walk free. But they arrest only one man because he killed only one other person. It doesn't make any sense to me why they don't arrest one man who is responsible of killing 1 million people. His professor looked at him and said that, imagine a farmer. Think of a farmer. And farmer has a lot of chickens. And farmer kills his chickens. Who cares? This is not your business. You are not supposed to intervene. Then he goes on to explain, saying that this is national sovereignty. A sovereign state can do whatever they want with their citizens. And Lemkin answers, says, but the people are not chickens.
Raphael Lemkin will coin the expression genocide. His works would become the founding principles of the new International Penal Code still in use today to prosecute and judge crimes of genocide or crimes against humanity. But in June 1921, the fact that Talat Pasha is guilty in the face of history shouldn't be a factor in the jury's decision about this young man charged with murder. In the audience, the tension is palpable for all those awaiting the verdict. At last, the president of the jury takes the stand. In accordance with the decision of the jury, we find the defendant not guilty of the punishable act with which he has been charged. On June 3, 1921, less than 3 months after the attack, Soghomon Tehlirian is acquitted after an expedited trial of only 2 days.
Ce procès est particulièrement gênant pour la chancellerie allemande. L'Allemagne était la seule puissance en mesure de stopper la main du bourreau turc contre la population arménienne. Et elle ne l'a pas fait pour des raisons stratégiques, mais quelque part, elle porte cette responsabilité d'avoir laissé faire.
Deutschland hat niemals ernsthaft dieses Kriegsbündnis mit der Türkei in Frage gestellt, auch versucht, alle Risiken einzuschränken, die es in Frage stellen könnten. Es hatte die absolute Priorität. Und das ist in meinen Augen das Verbrechen. Es war das Bündnis mit Mördern, von denen man wusste, dass sie Mörder sind. Es war im späten 19., frühen 20. Jahrhundert der imperialistische Gedanke, eine Weltmacht zu sein oder zu werden, analog zu Großbritannien, Frankreich und Russland. Und Deutschland hat als Basis dafür den Nahen Osten gesehen. Es kommt dann zu diesen unseligen Aussagen von Kaiser Wilhelm II. Auf seiner zweiten Orientreise, wenige Zeit nach den entsetzlichen Massakern an den Armeniern, wo er sich zum Schutzherrn von 300 Millionen Muslimen weltweit erklärt.
Ce qui explique largement le verdict d'acquittement qui est déguisé sous la forme d'une perturbation psychologique de l'accusé.
Tehlirian is acquitted and leaves the court in a round of applause. To the press and in the public eye, the verdict is considered a true act of justice of the young Weimar Republic. But nobody knows Tehlirian isn't telling the whole truth. His parents have indeed been slain, but he could not have been present at the scene, much less be wounded and buried under the bodies of his dearest ones. In 1915, when the tragedy took place, the young Tehlirian had already joined the Armenian volunteers who fight alongside the Russians against the Turks in the Caucasus. One year later, when Russian troops finally reach Erzurum in Armenia, only 22 of the 25,000 Armenians who lived in the city remain. Private Tehlirian realizes he will never see his family again. Soghomon Tehlirian isn't exactly the engineering student he claims to be, and Kaluzdian is more than just an interpreter. The two men are part of the same secret commando, and are main players in one of the most extraordinary manhunts of the century, Operation Nemesis. The operation sees the light of day after the end of the war. In 1918, when the Allies arrive in Constantinople, the defeated Turkey is vilified by the international community after the scope of the Armenian massacre is revealed. In response, the new Turk government decides to immediately try all the executives responsible for the genocide. Talat Pasha and the two other members of the triumvirate all receive a death sentence in absentia, for they've already been exfiltrated thanks to their German allies.
L'Allemagne refuse l'extradition et donc pour le parti Tachnak, il n'y a pas d'autre solution que de dire bon bah écoute, voilà, il faut qu'on se rende justice nous-mêmes et il va y avoir une patiente organisation tout à fait clandestine de cette opération Némésis, c'est-à-dire l'opération Vengeance. Et alors à partir de là, on réunit quelques jeunes gens qui ont des raisons tout à fait personnelles de vouloir tirer vengeance des assassins de leur famille, sinon de leur peuple. Et cette opération va être mise en place avec une dizaine de noms.
Soghomon Tehlirian is an activist of the Dashnak party. He is trained to fight, and this is not his first mission.
Il avait déjà, par exemple, exécuté un officier des services de renseignement turcs d'origine arménienne à Istanbul, qu'on appelle un traître, en fait, qui était un officier. Donc, il avait déjà une pratique.
The decision to eliminate Talat Pasha is a strategic decision from the party. Tehlirian's mission isn't just to have him killed, but his orders are to make sure he is arrested and that his trial puts the Armenian Genocide at the forefront of every news debate.
Une opération de justice, de première réparation symbolique, et puis de rappeler cette cause-là, au moment où justement elle est en train de disparaître de la scène internationale du fait des circonstances de sortie de guerre, où on est fatigué de la guerre, où on doit renouer avec les anciennes puissances vaincues qui sont quand même toujours des marchés, des bouchers, des pays importants. La Turquie, même vaincue, reste un pays important. La Russie, même bolchevique, reste un pays important. Donc il est clair que les petites nations ou la justice à l'égard des petites nations pèse peu.
Je pense qu'il y a une dimension presque personnelle. La Fédération révolutionnaire arménienne était le parti qui a investi le plus dans sa relation avec le comité Union et Progrès. Un climat de confiance. Ce sont des militants qui dînaient ensemble le soir à l'île des Princes, à Istanbul, qui ont fait la révolution ensemble, qui militaient dans l'opposition à Paris ou à Genève, qui se connaissaient parfaitement, qui avaient des traits culturels communs, qui étaient francophones. Donc, pour eux, le génocide était inconcevable. Ils ne pouvaient pas imaginer une seconde que leurs alliés, avec lesquels ils avaient une telle intimité, pourraient aller jusqu'à cette extrémité-là. Donc l'opération Némésis, c'est un règlement. Certes, on exécute en quelque sorte la sentence par contumace, c'est présenté comme tel, mais je pense que c'est aussi une vengeance contre des gens qui ont trahi le parti.
Between 1920 and 1922, the avenging Armenian assassins of Operation Nemesis shoot 8 high-level officials of the Young Turks.
Il fallait vraiment que les conditions soient réunies pour que telle opération ait lieu. Il fallait rien précipiter, il fallait rien bâcler. Le détail avait son importance. Il y a un élément fondamental, c'est qu'au sein des jeunes Turcs, il y a un Arménien Tachnak qui s'appelle Hraç Papazian, qui se fait passer pour un étudiant turc et qui, lui, va vivre totalement à la mode turque. Mais il est Tachnak. Et c'est lui aussi qui va renseigner les commandos. Les commandos, pas les commandos. Et lui, il a été jusqu'à se circoncire. Il a été jusqu'à porter, alors sa famille a été aussi massacrée, il a été jusqu'à porter le cercueil de Talat Pacha, le jour de son enterrement. Mais je pense que sans lui, il n'y a pas d'opération Némésis.
After years of fighting both Allied occupation and the Sultan, Mustafa Kemal, a World War I hero, establishes the new Turk Republic in 1923 on the ruins of the old Ottoman Empire.
Mustafa Kemal was not involved in Armenian genocide, number one. And number two, he condemned the Armenian killings. He called Union and party leaders as murderers. In a parliament, in a talk that he gave, he called the killings of 1915 as a shameful act. And he repeated this several times. Not because he was a human rights activist, or he was in favor of Armenian, or he was an altruistic man. He was a nationalistic leader, and 1920s he thought, you know what, in order to establish a Turkish republic, I should distance myself with this murderous early generation, which he did. But then he changed his opinion. There were other occasions where he saved and protected the Union and Progress Party leaders also.
La transformation de l'alphabet, qui est une des réformes de Mustafa Kemal, a privé les Turcs d'une partie de leur héritage écrit en ottoman. C'est une façon d'effacer, bien sûr, la mémoire du passé, la mémoire des événements de cette époque. Il y aura même d'ailleurs un institut d'études turques créé dans les années 30 qui va réinventer l'histoire de la Turquie, le berceau, la langue, etc. Et on ne peut pas, justement, dans ce nouveau mythe, la présence d'autres populations est encombrante et gênante.
In 1943, at Turkey's request, Nazi Germany transfers the remains of Talat Pasha to Istanbul, a proof that indeed times have changed. The Monument of Liberty in Sicily, Istanbul, still celebrates Talat as a national hero. Nearby lies Enver Pasha, another member of the triumvirate also implicated in the massacres. His ashes were transferred in 1996, only a few years ago, a final provocation of the Turk authorities who persistently deny the existence of an Armenian genocide.
If Turkey acknowledges the genocide, they have to rectify the wrongdoing. They have to pay money, and they have to compensate the Armenian losses they don't want. So one important reason is material. What are the moral reasons? I call it on two levels. One is what I call Pinocchio effect. You know the Pinocchio. The more he lies, the bigger nose becomes. Turkey lies more than 90 years. Turkey has a very long nose now. It's not so easy now to say that I'm sorry, I was mistaken. Third important reason, I think it has something to do with Turkish national identity. You know, the nation states, they need heroes. They need founding fathers, big men. And the problem that we have, our heroes, our founding fathers, were so much involved with Armenian genocide. It is hard for us to call our founding fathers as thieves and murderers.
The road would be long for the little state of Armenia to finally become independent. A small Armenian republic had been created at the end of the First World War under the patronage of the victors. But the country is wedged between two predator states and is neglected by the Allied nations. Negotiations between Soviet Russia and Kemalist Turkey will seal its fate. From 1920 to 1991, Armenia will be one of the socialist Soviet republics of the Caucasus. As for Soghomon Tehlirian's fate,
il va vivre essentiellement donc au départ en Yougoslavie, et puis il va se balader entre le Maroc, le Proche-Orient et les États-Unis. Et là où il passe, dès qu'il rencontre des Arméniens, les Arméniens se mettent à genoux et lui baisent la main droite. Là où il est enterré, donc à Fresno, il n'y a pas son visage sur la plaque. C'est une main qui dépasse. La main qui a vengé le peuple arménien.